This is Laugh or Death, hosted by keynote speaker Paul Ozenkup.
I've been looking forward to this podcast because of my guest. She's fabulous. Dr. Melissa Mork is a clinical forensic psychologist and graduate professor. And when she's not teaching, Melissa works with groups impacted by mass shootings, providing immediate grief triage for survivors, families, and their communities. And her TEDx talk called Dead Serious, Can Dark Humor Save Us? Is an editor's pick, a must watch. If you like TED Talks and you're interested in this topic, it doesn't get any better than this. She's a certified humor professional, a celebrated international speaker, and a #1 best-selling author of Laugh, Cry, Yes, A Survival Guide to Grief. Recently, Melissa competed for Minnesota's Funniest Person, and she didn't win, but she was the only comedian who could diagnose the judges, which anyone who's judging a comedy competition needs a DSM-5 or something like
absolutely.
that. Right? Yeah. So welcome, Melissa.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I love talking about death, grief, that kind of thing. We're going to have fun.
Well, thank God that there's someone out there that really likes to and is good at talking about this type of stuff.
I'm all about it.
Well, good. Well, we're going to make it comfortable and have a good time doing it. So to start out, I always ask all my guests the same first question. What is something weird about you that you love, or something weird that makes you happy, Melissa?
I love the smell of skunk, and I'll tell you why. I grew up on a farm, and we had a horse named Napoleon. He was a white gelding, and he was the only horse we had. And horses like company. And so there's a Shetland down the road, about half a mile, a little black Shetland pony named Sugar. And Napoleon would get out, and no matter what we tried, he would escape, and he would wind up over making hay with Sugar. And the neighbors would call and say, your horse is here, and we'd go and get him and lead him back home. Well, one time when he was out, he got sprayed by a skunk. And so we went and brought him home, but the smell was so strong, we had to give him a bath in tomato juice, which is how you get rid of that smell.
Right.
And so then we had a pink pony that smelled like skunk because
You were the original Pink Pony Club.
Yes, but no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't get that smell out of him. But when you love somebody, you love their smell. And so for weeks and weeks after that, he still smelled like skunk. And to this day, when I smell skunk, I think of Napoleon.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
That's sweet. You ever walk by like a bad dispensary or somebody smoking weed on the
weed? I will smell the skunk weed, and I'm like, oh, Napoleon.
Yeah. Oh, little Napoleon. That's funny. That's a good story.
Yeah. Thanks.
I had a more tragic skunk story. When I lived in California, there was a neighbor who would always feed the wildlife, and we had albino peacocks in the neighborhood they were amazing, but also just don't feed wildlife. So this woman would be out there like Snow White feeding the wildlife. So we'd have these albino peacocks coming around, 25 turkeys that were just absolutely obnoxious.
They're a menace.
And of course, skunks, and everything else. So these skunks would come into my yard. Well, one day there was a skunk middle of the day trying to burrow down by the cement wall kind of near my house. And I'm like, I do not need a family of skunks back there. So I've got a trash can lid like a shield and a long pole, and I'm trying to kind of shoo it out from between this wall and the dirt, this retaining wall. And I'm going and I'm like kind of shooing it, and all of a sudden it's not moving. And I was like, oh my God, I was in tears. I killed this skunk. And I was like, I called my wife, who's a veterinarian. And I'm like, it was the skunk. It was in the middle of the day. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to move. And when I tried to flip it over this retaining wall to just get it out of there. And it lands on my barbecue grill, which was open. I was like, oh my God, man. I'm just a horrible person. Yeah, it was just like, anyway, that's my skunk story. So I don't have as good of feelings about this.
Everyone should have a good skunk story.
Yeah, that's true.
Add to the repertoire.
Oh, man. So one of my favorite things, Melissa, that you've done recently is you're on TikTok, and you had a TikTok just go viral and blow up. And to me, it was just a hilarious TikTok because you stitched yourself responding to this woman who she was saying, like, talk about the, dumbest time a guy has mansplained to you. And then can you give a cliff notes of kind of how what your response was?
Well, so I have had a series of losses, starting with the suicide of my grandmother, and the death of friends, and my parents both died when I was in college, and my husband died when my kids were teens, and just all of these losses. And my master's thesis is in bereavement, and I've gone through all of these losses, and I've written books on grief. And one day I was presenting on grief, and a man came up to me afterwards and told me that I was grieving wrong. And he informed me on some of the realities of grief. And then I asked him, who have you lost in your own life? And he said, my dog when I was 12.
Oh, man. And and that obviously resonated with a lot of people, because that thing got shared like 6 million times and went viral and all this. But to me, I was laughing so hard when you got to the end of that, because it's like, guys, we don't always have to know everything. Okay.
Right.
Just let a woman grieve however she's going to grieve, right. Especially someone who's kind of like a professional griever.
I'm an expert at it. And I don't want to negate the realities of the loss of a pet. Like, that's incredibly difficult. But also,
right.
That was 12 when he was 12, and he was in his late 40s at that time. So that he had plenty of time to kind of work through that grief, right?
Yeah, yeah. And also, I don't care if it was that day. Like, we don't have to tell other people how to grieve. Or
Truth.
explain, like, well, here's actually how. Yeah, it just was a great. Yeah, if you can always follow Melissa on TikTok. She's a great follow. So where did your sense of humor come from? Like, growing up, like, how would you describe your sense of humor? Where did it come from?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't actually know how to answer that. My mother was very funny. My father was funny. Together my father found all of my mother's flaws endearing. And so she would get mad, and he would just laugh and tell her how beautiful she was when she was angry. And she was a terrible cook. And he would, when the smoke alarm would go off, he would say, dinner's ready, and we would all go eat. One time she made, my dad liked meat in his spaghetti sauce when we would have spaghetti. He liked marinara. And so she's making spaghetti. She's got everything out. She realizes at the very last minute she doesn't have any ground beef anywhere in the house, not in the freezer, not in the fridge. So she reached into the back of the refrigerator and pulled out a pack of hot dogs, probably expired. I don't know, but hot dogs. Paul, did she chop up those hot dogs and put them in the spaghetti sauce? She did not. She put them in the blender and hit puree, hoping that they would create the same consistency as ground beef. And then she scrapes that sludge into the spaghetti sauce and then puts it on the spaghetti. Like, she didn't keep it separate. Like, she just put it all together.
Oh, no.
It was so disgusting, even she couldn't eat it. Like, it was inedible. And so then, because they were both children of the Depression, she had to put it in a container and put it in the freezer for later. She couldn't just toss it.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you got to find some time you're going to eat.
You can't
that.
waste
Yeah.
food.
Oh
So then one day he comes home from work, and she has pulled that stuff out and put it on the counter to defrost. And he walked in, and because she had put a little masking tape label that said Wiener spaghetti, right? And so he comes home, and he sees that it's defrosting, and he looks at her and says,
Wiener spaghetti. That's going to be the name of my new band.
and he says, you want to go out to eat tonight? And she goes, oh, okay. So she goes upstairs, put on her lipstick, and he puts that back in the freezer and pulls out, pizzas for us kids. And pretty soon, this was just their ongoing tradition that if she didn't feel like cooking, or if she wanted to go out, she'd pull the Wiener spaghetti out and put it on the counter just in time for him to see it and then, ask her out on a date.
That is so cute.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That is such a great story.
Yeah.
And I like that it's kind of got like a little dirty undertone, like, pull out the Wiener spaghetti, honey. We're having a date night.
I didn't want to think about it like that, Paul. It was my parents who were talking about.
It's your parents.
They never did
It's hilarious.
anything like that.
It's hilarious because it's not my parents.
Yeah. But,
yeah.
But my mom, just as another story, she died when I was in college, right? I was a junior in college. But I was attending school about 6 hours away, and so she would come for a long weekend, and she would, take me to the grocery store to pick up a lot of groceries to get me stocked up for until her next visit. And I would get up to the conveyor belt to check out, and under this, under the salad, there would be an enema kit, and I would put more stuff on the conveyor belt, and there would be bladder pads, and then I'd put more on and there would be a king size box of condoms, and I'd have to hand these things over to the clerk and say, I'm sorry, I've changed my mind about these bladder pads. And my mother would just be standing there, thumbing through a Vogue magazine, pretending she wasn't the one that put them all in there for me. We would prank all the time.
That is so good.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What a great mom.
It's funny.
Oh, that's well. Now I definitely see where you get your sense of humor. Has it always been so then obviously, you listed off so many of the deaths in your family that you've experienced, and you speak about and write about using humor to be able to cope and kind of get through some of these difficult times. Mm-hmm. Has that always been a coping mechanism for you, or is that something that you kind of adapted over time?
No, it has always been a coping mechanism, and it really became a reality for me that I wanted to look into deeper when my mother was killed. We were at the funeral, and the pastor stopped the service and said, I want everyone to just turn to a neighbor and share a favorite story about Trudy. And my dad and my siblings and I, we couldn't speak, right? We were just so grief-stricken. But I listened, and at first there was awkward silences and sniffles, and there were whispers and chuckles, and then there were snorts and guffaws because people were sharing stories about my mom that were hysterical because she was such a funny lady.
Yeah.
And I listened to that laughter, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm allowed to laugh? If I can laugh, maybe I can get through this. If I can grieve for her with remembering how funny she was, I can do this. And the thing, Paul, the purpose of grief, the final task of grief, is to find a way to relocate that person into your heart and to have a different relationship with them. And for me, the best way to do that with grieving my mom was to remember how funny she was and the ways we laughed together and the ways we brought smiles to each other's faces. Because if I focus on how we would argue or the conflicts that happened between us, I feel further apart. Even now, if I think about how I was such a snot to her, I feel terrible. But if I can remember how we laughed together, suddenly we're back in connection.
That's beautiful. I love that the final task of grief, being able to relocate that person into your heart. And because I think about with people I've lost, that I know that eventually the painful tears, thinking about them and it making me cry, that eventually it's going to get to thinking about them and making me smile and thinking fondly and making me laugh and that kind of stuff. And for some people, I think it happens right away.
Right.
We're able to get to that place, and other people, it takes a while. They say
Exactly.
Comedy is tragedy plus time.
Exactly.
But I think the thing no one tells us is that that the amount of time can be up to you.
Yes, and it's really determined by a number of factors, that length of time. For example, it's an equation that is very flawed, but the equation I generally give to, for example, widows or widowers is allow yourself at least 1 month of active grief for every year of the relationship. So if you've been married for 50 years, it might be 50 months of grief, right? And of course, that doesn't apply to the death of a child or some other kinds of losses. But the point is that it is an extended period of time, and that you will occasionally be ambushed by that grief 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, on anniversaries or birthdays, or your child gets married and their dad isn't there. 8 years later, it's going to hit you. It's going to ambush you. So and also the kind of loss also determines how long that's going to take. Whether it was violent.
I was going to ask about that, like a suicide versus. I've got a friend who recently lost a child, and it's
Yes,
that even just supporting him through that is it feels so different than supporting somebody through any other kind of death, you know?
Exactly.
It's,
You know,
yeah.
so
yeah.
if it's violent, if it's unexpected, sudden, there's a traumatic component to it. And that can
Yeah.
become much more complicated grief trajectory. And even supporting your friend, it's a vicarious trauma for you because you're in pain and you don't quite know how to make sense of it either. And so it can
Right.
be very complicated for them, him, and for you as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're the perfect messenger about all of this because you know, life is such a balance of, you know, the grief and the sorrow and sadness and, you know, happy, funny, fun memories. And you're just a great messenger for it because you flow so evenly between those two things. What
Thank you.
I'm curious, like, what if somebody is going through, whether it's grief or a traumatic situation, or even just very dark or stressful situation in their life, or depression, and they want to be able to lean on humor or use humor to cope, but sometimes people aren't able to access it, or it's like, I don't know how to even get there because I'm so sad. What are your thoughts about that?
That's a great question. And I'm going to tell you a story. And it's a real bummer of a story. My friend
Let's do it.
has 5 sons, and the older 3 went to Walmart one afternoon, late afternoon, to just do a Walmart run. And by the time dinner was ready, they still weren't back. So she called each of their phones, no answer. And just as she hung up on the last call to her youngest of the 3, there's a police officer coming to her door, regretting to inform her that there had been a car crash and all 3 boys were gone.
Oh,
And she was left to grieve with her husband and the 2 remaining sons, who at the time were 8 and 12. And they are suddenly abandoned by their 3 older brothers. And if you have brothers, especially older brothers, that's a significant loss. Yeah. Now, is there any humor in that story or in that situation? No. But what she did instead was every night before bed, she would put on a sitcom. And they would all sit down and they would watch and laugh. And she said, I just wanted my boys to go to bed with a little laughter. She couldn't provide it, but she could find it. She knew where to go to locate it. And it still had profound impact in offering a little bit of light into that situation.
That's beautiful. It's interesting that you say that too. One in my book, one of the tools I give people is I call it a comedy chaser. And like, no matter what your day is like, no matter what your screen time viewing is like, just make the final screen time of your day something light, something funny, to just replace all of the stress-inducing chemicals with stress-reducing chemicals and just kind of cleanse the palate. And it sounds like that's what she was doing.
Exactly.
For those boys, is just like, let's go to bed or let's go to bed with something a little lighter than what they're feeling throughout the day.
This is why SpongeBob is therapy for me.
Is that what she would put on? Or
she would do SpongeBob.
Yeah.
I mean, just whatever they were in the mood for. But even I will put on SpongeBob. One of the first 100 episodes. After those, not so much. But
it's just a little too goofy. Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful story because I think that you're right. Like, even though maybe she still couldn't find a place to laugh, like, she was able to at least harness humor for somebody else. And make that a part of their healing.
Exactly. And even in the depth of her grief, which was profound, she understood the importance of it for her boys, which I loved.
Yeah. Do you see people that start to feel guilty? So like my friends, when they were at my house the week that their son died in an accident, in a motorcycle accident, and we were having dinner, and this is probably, 3 days after. And during dinner, we were talking, about something else. We were just trying to provide some comfort, but we were all having dinner, and then something came up, and we started laughing. And Mom got really emotional about that and had to take a minute because she was feeling guilty for like laughing and having a good time. in that. Do you see that? Is that pretty
Yeah.
thing that happens pretty often?
Yeah. And I think there's so much behind that I'm laughing and he will never laugh again, right? That kind of thing. Or
yeah.
I'm laughing and it means I'm not taking this seriously, or I'm laughing and I'm in that laughter, I'm forgetting him. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
different messages
Yeah.
tied to that, but
How could I be pretending like I'm okay or this is okay right now?
how my laughter conveys that this is fine. And it doesn't. That's not what it is. It's a release valve. When I talk to police officers, when I talk to anybody who's grieving, survivors of trauma, and they're laughing, it's because sometimes the emotions are just pressed down. They're tight and they haven't been released yet. And that laughter allows for some sort of air, some sort of breath. And there's life in that laughter, right? And so, and her son, as tragic and unfortunate as that death is, if he were around, he'd want her laughing, right?
Right.
That he would want his mother to have peace, even momentarily, even briefly, have little moments of peace. And so I don't know that there should be guilt. And I understand why it is, but if we can encourage individuals to provide space for laughter, they're going to get through the hard parts a lot smoother.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love what you said too about there's life in laughter. Like it's an emotion, and our sense of humor is a part of who we are, part of our
It's part of our
identity.
design.
And so we're letting that kind of come back to life a little bit. I remember I used to work in college administration and work with students in the student disciplinary setting, and part of my job was investigating and adjudicating sexual assaults, and I would have to hear all sides of the story and all this, and so I was interviewing a victim, and she was recounting her story, and probably this is third or fourth time, probably, to her parents, she's already done this, to the police, and now to me. And so she's kind of going through it. And I said, I need you to be as specific as you can. And so I said, when he reached out to touch you, did that feel like it was in a sexual way? And she paused. And she looked down, and she goes, and she started giggling, and she goes, no one's asked me that, but now that you mention it, she goes, not at first. No, it was more like he was searching for a doorknob in the dark. And then she started like laughing hysterically. Like she made herself laugh so hard. And so I just kind of went with her. I kind of smiled like, yeah, I could see that. And just kind of gave her the space to laugh. But she was laughing so hard, like tears were coming out her eyes. And then she said, sorry, but I just, this is the first time I've laughed since this happened.
Yes.
And there was something almost magical about that moment. Like I could see that she was realizing something like there's something about me that's back, or like I'm still me, or, this is still traumatic and this is still so very difficult, but like there's part of me that is still here.
I have chills. I think that's such a profound insight. Yes, absolutely. It makes sense. It's, it reconnects us to our humanity. It reconnects us to our identity. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like if I lose laughter, if I lose humor in my own life, that's
the tragedy, right?
Yeah.
That's the ultimate.
Yeah. It's just
tragedy.
Absolutely crushes the human spirit.
Yeah.
So what about, you just did this awesome TEDx
Thank you.
On dark humor.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people that say like, oh, my type of humor is dark humor. Like that's what really,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that say that. And I think we can use it it is very beneficial. And I think some people rely on it too much. But I guess to start, why is dark humor beneficial, especially to those? I know you serve folks in military, police. You've worked with all sorts of folks who respond to traumatic situations. Mm-hmm. Why does dark humor work?
Well, there's a couple of reasons it's helpful. First, it connects you to other people, right? It's shared language. It's a shared absurdity. And I think dark humor often is targeting what's absurd about the situation? What is just insane about this, right? This is, and it's
Yeah.
a moral violation. It's this thing that we're observing is, it's terrible, it's threatening, it's dangerous, it's somehow distressing, or should be distressing. And then when we crack a joke about it, suddenly we have control over it. We have just harnessed it. We have just identified it. We've named it and also said, this is absurd. And then we all laugh about it. And that creates connection with each other. We've all identified the absurdity together. It also has named the issue. And I think in the TED, I talk about how it's a hazing of, if I can tell you something if I can laugh about something disgusting, I tell you the story and we're both laughing about it, I can trust that you're going to be able to handle it when other bad things happen, right? Suddenly,
Right.
If I'm talking about having to cut off, a cadaver's hand to bring it to get fingerprints, right? And I tell you that story and we're laughing about it. And then you talk about the time that you saw a foot, right? Dismembered foot somewhere. And we laugh about that. Neither of us are going to lose our lunch when we're talking about something else particularly tragic or awful.
Or when the next tragic thing happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like this is my buddy in combat per se, whatever that role is, whether
Right.
it's in a hospital
Right.
or whatever. Yeah.
The other benefit
Yeah,
of
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, another benefit is that it provides short-term coping. Like imagine having to be the police officer that went to the house to inform my friend about the death of her 3 sons. The tragedy of that, like the difficulty of that. He can't be crying when he's delivering that news,
Right.
but he can manage it with laughter when he gets back to the squad room, right?
Yeah.
If he can find a way to suppress his emotions and use humor and laughter to release that, and then the important thing is go someplace where he can process the emotions of it elsewhere, right?
Right.
That's one of the risks, is if we don't do that part, if we just rely on the humor for coping. But it does provide a reprieve. It provides a release valve, and it provides a place to put our emotions and to control them for the time being. I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's so perfectly said, it can be a temporary way to cope, to get you through whether it's a shift, a conversation, the next hour, whatever, so that you can get to your counseling appointment on Friday, or be able to process it with a friend later,
Right,
or
right.
whatever, to be able to even just get to that point.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think for me, like, when people use dark humor, if I'm not an insider and they're using like a lot of dark humor about their situation, like maybe their traumatic upbringing or something like that, I can feel like uncomfortable. Like, oh man, this is a lot. Like, I'm just getting trauma dumped on here, but they're doing it in a humorous way. I don't know if that is something that you've seen,
Yes.
or if it's because I'm not in group with them or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point. There are some risks to dark humor. I was talking to a chief of police yesterday, actually, and he said, we've had some issues with, there was a crime scene, and there was a lot of onlookers. And he said a couple of my officers were standing around joking over by their squad cars, and it was all caught
Yeah.
on iPhone, right? It was caught on camera, and now the public is upset that they were laughing at a very serious situation. That's a risk, right? So
Yeah.
you have to be, and right now for police officers, they have body cams, dash cams, they have ring cameras everywhere. People's iPhones are out. And so they have to be very, like, they're being watched all the time, which,
Yeah.
we want accountability. But on the other hand, these men and women are facing profound situations where the only thing that's going to get them through, momentarily at least, is to make a joke about it. And so they have to be careful about audience. And I think what you're talking about too is that we have to be careful about who our audience is. Like, if one of those officers goes home and tells their wife and kids about the dismembered arm, that's not the right audience, right? And even though he thinks it's
Right,
funny,
right.
they're going to be damaged by that, right?
Yeah,
So
the kid's like, Dad. Yeah, yeah.
right, put down the turkey leg.
Like, you know what? I think I'm a vegetarian now, Dad. Thanks. Yeah. Maybe. Oh, my sister became a vegetarian at a very young age. She was like 9 or 10. I wonder why that was. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I remember when, again, when I was working in university administration, we had like a behavioral intervention team. We'd meet every week to talk about students we were concerned about for whatever reasons. And there was one year where we had several suicides. And so we were getting a bit concerned about like, this isn't normal. And, our team met all the time, and we had, clinical psychologists and police officers and that. And so we were really worried about like, this becoming, an epidemic or something like that on our campus. And so we were talking about these, like, I think we at that point had 3 suicides, but the police officer who was always working with our team said, well, we got to take a step back here for a second. We've got over 30,000 students. We talk about 15 or so students a week that we're concerned about. And, we've lost 3 students. So, we're still batting first in the lineup, or whatever. And it was good perspective, like, because we're all sitting there freaking out about it. But unfortunately, there was a faculty member that was there in that committee who's not usually there and observing. And that did not sit well with the faculty, because the rest of us were like, yeah, good point, man. Like, we're doing okay. Right. But that faculty member was like, whoa, that seems very insensitive. We just lost a student. And it was insensitive, but it also is like, man, we're talking about some really difficult stuff every day.
And it wasn't made in front of the family members, right? It wasn't made in front of the friend group, right? It was a safe space, or should have been, could have been a safe space to let that out.
It was the last time we ever let an outside person into one of our behavioral intervention team meetings. We actually had a meeting about it and said, okay, let's not do that anymore. So it makes sense. Like, that dark humor is probably best used in group.
Exactly. Exactly. And there are a couple other rules that I think we want to talk about, is that it shouldn't be targeted. Our humor should not be targeted towards a victim. Right?
Yeah.
It should not be targeted on an out group that is marginalized. If we're going to punch somebody with our humor, we need to punch up, not down. So when Kaya Ostrauer did her research on the use of dark humor as a defense mechanism in the Holocaust, a lot of the humor that she heard about was joking about the guards and the Nazis and they were making all kinds of jokes about the absurdity of the situation, but also about those that were in control of the situation. They were not targeting one another or anyone weaker than themselves. And I think that it was still very, very dark.
And that's a rule of comedy, I think, that just is, you don't see a lot of comedians who do well by punching down consistently. It's always punching up is acceptable. Punching down just typically isn't. Yeah. And do you find dark humor, we were talking about kind of in a group setting, with whether it's first responders, that kind of stuff. But do you find that it can be therapeutic for the individual? I was at an open mic just earlier this week, and I saw a very new comic do a joke, something like, he said, I'm pretty weird and kind of a loner. And so I figured the only things I'm qualified to do would be like either a school shooter or a comedian. So I really hope this works out. I was like, God, that's a great joke. Yeah. And I went up and told him afterward, I'm like, that joke, dude, is so good. The other thing I love about that joke is it puts the audience in such an uncomfortable position. Like, I better laugh at this joke. You know what I mean? And he is kind of an awkward dude. And so what I loved about that joke also was thinking about, that joke had to come from somewhere true probably for him, So at some point, not that he really was thinking about being a school shooter, but somewhere he had to think like, hey, I'm kind of an awkward dude, and writing this joke out, it seems like such a therapeutic thing for him to be able to do, rather than just sit and dread about being alone or being different or whatever. It's like, hey, I'm writing jokes about this stuff, and now I'm going and actually performing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is therapeutic. After my husband died, I tried stand up for the first time, and my set was about the pros and cons of having a dead husband. And most people didn't find it funny. Well, probably because they didn't have one. But when you have a dead husband, it's hysterical. When I get together with other widows, we just, yeah. But it was therapeutic for me because it allowed me to to observe the absurdity of the situation, right? It was absurd. And I was able to look at, okay, this is what's funny. This is what's awful. This is what is so, for example, they say you can't take it with you, but the one thing you can take with you is all of the passwords, right?
That's great.
And
That's
it's
great.
true.
I know a widow who has specifically told me about that. She's
Yes.
like, God, I wish he would have
Written them down. I still have
written
one
these
account
down,
I
these
can't get
passwords.
into, right? I
Yeah,
have
exactly.
no idea. I don't know the name of his best friend in first grade. I should have listened better, but I don't know. So
Was it you that didn't you also have a joke about listening or something like that?
oh yes. Well, okay. So
tell-
yeah, okay. And it's not even a joke. It's the truth. We had some conflict in the marriage. He was a bit of a jerk, and so was I. So we would go to marriage counseling, and we would still end up like arguing over the same things over and over and over again. So after he died, I realized we never resolved those things. And so I called a marriage counselor and said, I would like to schedule some appointments with you to work through some marriage conflicts. And he said, sure. Tell me a little bit more about that. And I said, well, my husband died. And he goes, oh, I'm not an expert on grief. And I was like, no, I know. I am. I've got that part. I need to know how to be married to a dead man. I need to know how to resolve these conflicts that never got resolved. And he goes, oh, are you available on Friday? So I actually went to marriage counseling with my dead husband to work through these issues. And what I found above everything else is that he is a much better listener now.
Oh, so that's a good joke too. Man. See, if your set didn't go well, that must mean there were too many dead husbands in the audience. Yeah.
That's right. Well, there were a lot of husbands. They just didn't think it was all that funny.
Yeah. Maybe they weren't as alive as they thought they were. Can I tell you a dark joke
Please.
that I've been working on, or I've used a couple times recently with stand up. I don't do this with corporate stuff, but and talking about like preferred pronouns and stuff. And I say, well, my mom was always like, oh, that preferred pronoun stuff is garbage. That's just all ridiculous or whatever. But nowadays, she's all like non-binary and gender neutral now that she's dead. And then I'm like, oh, no, I'm sorry. I know that's bad. That's my fault. I mean, now that they're dead. So
That's
I like that joke. I like that. And it's funny. I get like usually the first part of that, the audience does like a little laugh, but like a little like, oh.
Yeah.
And that's why the tag of
the
it
tag is brilliant.
works all right.
Yeah.
But you know what? And that comes from therapeutic place of just writing and thinking about my mom. And honestly, my mom was pretty open-minded about most things, but I remember having a conversation with her about like, what is this preferred pronoun stuff?
Yeah.
So there we go. Well, I guess, Melissa, tell me what you think in terms of when is a good balance between grief, when like, hey, I just want to cry, I want to grieve, I want to be in it, and laughter or humor and levity.
There isn't a formula. I think you can actually, if you can allow yourself to be ambushed by that wave of grief. Sometimes we run from it. Sometimes we suppress it. Sometimes we can't bear it because we think that we'll never come out of it. But the truth is we always come up for air. We always come up for air. And it's in those times when you are coming up for air, when that wave of grief is receding, that's the time to give yourself permission to seek something funny or to seek out laughter. And I think you mentioned earlier that I'm able to transition from really dark stuff to levity. And I think it's because I'm holding both in my hands all the time. I'm open to either one at any given moment. And I think that gives me freedom to experience both wholeheartedly, fully. And I guess that's my invitation to every listener and every audience member is to provide yourself space to be in the dark, difficult times. Like they're unavoidable. Getting a divorce, you don't want to be there. You don't want to go through this, but you're not getting to make that decision anymore. It's happening. But can you sit with the discomfort and allow it to move through you, and then look for the absurdity, look for the humor, look for the laughter, or find something on screen. But if you allow yourself to kind of flow between those two states, it's going to be a much more manageable trajectory than if you just stay in the hard part.
I love that. Yeah, giving yourself permission to do that, because our brains can't process the psychological distress and the humor simultaneously.
No.
So any chance we give ourselves to have just a brief break from our trauma is like, hey, that trauma's still going to be there.
Yes.
So I'll take a 30-second break from it if that's all I get.
Right.
Allow yourself that if you have the chance.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So it's not, humor doesn't fix it. It just gives you a break from it, which I think is critically important.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Melissa, if for any of the listeners, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, wow, she's great, and I just really enjoyed this conversation, we barely even touched on all of the great content that's in her TEDx talk. So check out, what's the name of your TEDx talk again? They can just Google your name and
Right.
TEDx. But
Well, it was originally Dead Serious. Can dark humor save us? But Ted changed it to something else, and I don't quite know what it is. But it's about, if you look up, dark humor, it'll pop up.
Dark humor, TED Talk, Melissa Mork. And for more information about Melissa's speaking and teaching, go to melissamork.com. Melissa, you are awesome. This was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Paul. I'm really grateful.
You've been listening to Laugh or Death with Paul Ozencup. If you're planning a conference or event and want something smart, meaningful, and actually funny, book Paul to speak. To learn more or to get a copy of his book, The Humor Habit, visit laughordeath.com.